Hello.
Hello again.
Hello again.
Oh my goodness.
Another,
Another day.
another day, another pod.
I feel like my microphone is too close to me. I feel like the computer is too close to me. But I don't, this is where I always sit.
Yeah,
I don't know what the issue is.
maybe it's the computer moving.
Claustrophobic, Darren.
Right, we are dog sitting. So I have no idea whether there's going to be barking. There you go. Bark.
Oh, I didn't hear that. So,
Oh, that's good.
yeah.
Good.
Well, if there is barking, it's either Kate or
Yeah.
or the dogs.
Yeah.
Barking mad.
If you hear barking, um, yeah, you'll just have to ignore it.
Yeah. We've got dogs, all right.
Yeah, we've got
Sometimes
dogs.
they bark.
Dogs, plural.
Yes. Oh my goodness, you're gonna hate this episode.
Oh,
Speaking of dogs, you are
no.
going to get the rage.
Oh my God, a dog gets hurt and killed, doesn't it? It's going to ruin my
It is,
life.
this episode is going to ruin your day for sure, for a couple of days actually. This episode is someone else.
Why?
Yeah. I know.
Oh,
Why? Why do we do it? But I found that these episodes that ruin our days, these disgusting, awful episodes,
hmm.
are so fun to write. And that's awful to say.
It, yeah, it is because they're intriguing
That's
and
it. It's so
interesting.
captivating. I started
Yeah,
writing another episode. I literally started writing it, done a load of research, and I was like, it's just not as perplexing as it was.
hmm.
I don't really, it's not, I'm not bothered by it. And I
Yeah,
was like, I don't want to put in half effort of an episode that I personally am finding boring.
yeah.
I don't want to release.
I've
So,
honestly, I've got several folders on my computer where I've started a story thinking, oh, this will be really interesting, and then
mm,
like half written it, sometimes not even anywhere near half, just
yeah,
started it and thought, oh wait, is that it?
yeah.
That's actually a bit shit. Like there's nothing perplexing about it. It's just that's what it is, and it's like,
Oh, but I did read a post a little while ago and it actually kind of made me laugh, but also die a little bit inside. And it said, imagine being murdered and then podcasters not wanting to cover your story because it's
yeah,
not good enough.
it's not interesting or
It's
exciting
not
enough. I
interesting.
know.
That's
Yeah, no, that
shocking. We
is.
are terrible people. I'm aware of that.
Yeah. I think it's just when we do things like Leonard Lake and Charles Ing,
Hmm.
that for me, it's not that it was like, oh, what happened and what do you think and why do you think? It was just,
How?
it was just the whole what the fuck
Yeah,
that did
that's
it
this
for
one.
me.
Yeah.
Like, what the fuck? What has gone wrong inside someone's brain or soul that makes them want to do that? And Anatoly Moskvin
Uh-huh.
and I was like, why would you think that's okay? And Carl Tanzer,
Yeah.
why? Like, just why do you think
The monster in the
that's
morgue.
okay? Oh my God, that
Why?
enrages, why? That enrages me. If it, yeah, that
Yeah.
there's so many episodes that just enrage me, and I'm like, fuck it. And for me, Brady and Hindley, just the I mean, all of it was hideous, and there was nothing about that story that I thought, yeah, like nothing.
Yeah.
The thing with that really did me was the fact that they got some sort of pleasure out of scaring the children. And that to me was like one of the worst bits. Like these children were terrified and they seemed to like prolong that bit because they
Yeah.
enjoyed that. And then after all of that, and they knew they were cooked because they knew they were going to be in prison for the rest of their lives until they died. They couldn't just tell Keith's mum where he was,
Oh
and that
no.
fucking enraged me. It really does. But there's so many cases that we've covered that I look back on and I think, oh yeah, that case was bonkers. Like, it's a
Yeah.
bonkers world that we live in. And
Absolutely. And
all we
I
do is talk
actually,
about it. We don't create these cases. We just talk
Mhm.
about it and go, what the fuck?
Well, apparently to some people we lie.
Oh, do we?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we lie.
Yes. We lie, we tell untruths, but whatevs. Um, this episode falls into the category of what the fuck?
When people say we lie, it's just something's just popped into my head. I think it's when we go, yes, because we're professionals, and people go,
Oh, do you reckon?
clearly that's a
Lies.
lie. Yeah.
No.
Just so you know, we are aware that that is a lie. It's called being ironic.
Do you know what I think they're talking about?
What?
Random blabs. Go. Tripped myself up there because I haven't got one.
Well, in your face, because I have. And mine, well, I don't know if it pertains to the episode, but I did a random blam because I saw the word vampire in the title. So I did a random blam about blood.
Blood.
So, blood. The human body makes about 2 million red blood cells every second.
Mm-hmm.
That's some fast work.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think mine does. I think
Efficient.
mine's a little bit too lazy for that. Mine goes, well, I've made like 100. That's enough. That'll do. Don't need 2 million. 2 million every second.
Yes. Well, it's
How many
necessary.
Yeah, but how many do we use up then? Do we
What's
use
that? Because it's replacing.
do we use like
Well,
2
they
million?
die, don't they?
Oh, how long do they last then? How many blood cells have we got in our body then in 8 pints?
Oh, okay. It's 9:26
I
a.m.
need to look it up. I have the answer.
Go on.
So the human body, on average, contains around 20 to 30 trillion. That's trillion red blood cells
Quite a lot, really.
at any one time.
I'm trying to find mine because there's an angle that I want to go down because I read something earlier and I was like, that's crazy. So I'm just trying to do a little bit of research, which I was supposed to do this morning, but I forgot. So
I'm just looking about blood cells now. White blood cells are far less numerous than red blood cells, with roughly 4,000 to 11,000 per microliter of blood.
bleh.
Blood. Oh, there we go. We've all learnt something about blood.
So
Hmm.
my random blam is I don't know every single fact around it, so it's kind of a loose information, but it is still
That's
fact.
what we're all about.
Loose information. We'll just
If you
throw
don't
it
know
out
it,
there.
mate, make it up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So human like clinical trials where experiments on humans began in around like 1747 or something like that, where instead of testing on animals, it was tested on men.
Aminals.
Animals.
Okay.
Experiments were tested on men. It wasn't until 1990 that anything was tested on a woman.
Really?
Yes.
Oh,
And I found that really interesting because
yeah.
everything is to do with men's health up until about the 90s. Everything was to do about men's health, erectile dysfunction and things there's appeal for that and whatever else. So all clinical trials were based on men. Headache tablets.
1990.
Mm-hmm.
That's like
Yeah.
yesterday.
Yeah, I know.
mad.
Yeah, as well. I was born then. But yeah, so clinical trials on women are very, very late to the clinical trial world.
That's mad.
Yeah.
I
So everything,
never have guessed anywhere near 1990.
yeah, pretty much everything that we consume has been tested on a man. for its effects, but not a woman.
I mean, I get it.
Yeah.
If we're going to do an experiment, it could go wrong. I'd be like, right, don't do it on an animal. Do it on that bloke.
Yeah. I mean, that from my perspective, if it was a woman conducting these experiments, I'd be like, do it on men. Them are stupid. I'm joking, men aren't stupid.
Yeah, no,
but
we don't mean that.
No, but I believe it was done to preserve the health of men as opposed to the health of women, and not.
Yeah, it's not that men were
Men are
dispensable.
expendable. Yeah,
it was just that they wanted to know how men reacted to it rather than keep the men safe. Yeah,
that was it. Men's health was more important.
Yeah.
And I just thought that was quite interesting. I read something this morning and I was like, oh my goodness.
Oh my goodness. That is
very
recent. Yeah,
there you go then. Random blams. Done.
Do we have any other business before we episode?
I think we do. Yes, we do.
I think we might have.
I think we do as well. We have got a shout out.
Shout out. Another one.
So this shout out goes to Holly.
Holly
is an avid listener and always promotes us on her Instagram page, and she's always like, oh, I'm just doing this while listening to Perplexed, or you know,
really?
just always like promoting us, and she's thank you,
so lovely.
She is now subscribed and is part of the Blurbaloo.
That's so cute. That's so lovely. I don't have anything to do with Instagram or really much to do with social media, full stop. So I was unaware of that, but that is amazing. Yeah. And hey, Holly, and thank you so much for listening to us and subscribing.
Mm-hmm.
Keeps us doing what we're doing. And I'm going to say it again. You wait. You wait. You subscribers, you wait until you see what's coming.
Yeah. I mean,
love it.
It is exciting for all of our listeners because it is going to be available to every single listener. It is available, but the benefits are for those paying subscribers. They keep us doing what we're doing.
Everyone that wants it will get something. Everyone that subscribes will get everything. And the best part of it is that you people that have subscribed, the people that are in our lovely Blamily, you have made this possible to happen. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Holly, for joining.
Yeah. And thanks to everybody. Yeah. Just a massive thanks to everybody for listening, because our listens have gone up massively recently. So we are doing well. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Right, let's episode. Morning. So this I'm just going to go straight into it this episode because it's quite a lengthy one.
All right.
And it comes with a huge trigger warning.
Oh no.
Massive.
All right, go on then.
Think Jack the Ripper, but worse. There is your trigger warning.
Oh.
If you are queasy, if you are...
I am.
Okay. You have got no choice in this. I'm speaking to everybody else.
Oh.
If you suffered listening to the Jack the Ripper episodes, then you may suffer through this episode also.
Okay. I like the fact that you don't say, if you struggled with the Jack the Ripper episode, maybe give this one a miss. You're just going to struggle.
You're just going to struggle for it. Don't miss it, because honestly...
don't skip. Just listen in discomfort.
Yeah. No, okay. It is one not to be missed, because it does ask quite an important question. So yeah, don't miss it.
All right. I
So this
won't.
episode is called The Vampire of Sacramento. So Anthony Richard Trenton Chase, or Richard Chase, as he is known, was born on May 23rd, 1950 in Santa Clara County in California to parents Beatrice Chase and Richard Chase Sr. Around age 3, the family moved to Sacramento, California, and soon came along a little sister for Richard. Richard's childhood is somewhat hard to pin down. A few sources that I've read say that he was raised with loving, supportive parents. His mother and father were supportive and caring. However, his father was a strict disciplinarian, but this could have been considered quite normal growing up in the 50s. The physical abuse that Richard suffered doesn't seem to be out of the norm for the time. However wrong it is now, for a childhood in the 50s, the physical discipline that he sustained by his dad was considered quite normal. However, other sources say that Richard suffered constant physical abuse from his father and grew up in an unstable home marred with alcohol abuse and dysfunction. He had a mother who was mentally unstable and was often seeking help for her mental health issues. She was paranoid and sometimes aggressive, often accusing her husband of infidelity and of trying to poison her. So these arguments that the family had were often loud and violent and aggressive and held in full display of the children.
Oh.
It is also believed that other family members thought that Richard Sr. was too hard on his son, too strict a disciplinarian, and was overly critical of the young Richard. Again, this is cause for arguments in the household, the parenting differences that the mother and father had. So it's unclear to what degree Richard suffered physical abuse. He did suffer some form of physical abuse and criticism from his dad. It wasn't until Richard was about aged 8 that he stopped wetting the bed, and by age 10 he was lighting fires. And not just small fires for fun, he set fire to the neighbour's garage.
Oh.
Also by age 10, Richard became the main suspect when a few of the neighbourhood cats started going missing.
Oh, no.
It was only because Richard's mother had shown a neighbour some flower boxes in the back garden and just happened to mention that Richard had buried a cat amongst them that the penny kind of dropped with the neighbour, because it was clear to everyone on the outside of the family that Richard was a deeply disturbed child. The only reasonable suspect in the deaths of not just the neighbourhood cats, but also dogs, birds, rabbits. Had the McDonald triad been coined just a few years earlier than it was in 1963, it might have been very clear to others just what little Richard could be capable of as an adult. In school, Richard appeared to fit in. He had an average IQ, nothing special. He had some ups and downs in his home life, with his parents separating, moving home, then they got back together and then they moved again. In the 9th grade, around aged 15, his classmates and teachers described him as well-mannered and neat in appearance. He had friends, boys and girls, and he dated. However, he and the girls he dated soon found out that he had a small problem getting and maintaining an erection. Whether it was this or Richard's declining mental health, his behaviour started to deteriorate. By the end of his 2nd year of high school, he was rebellious, defiant. His appearance was no longer neat. He lost interest in things, had no ambition for his schoolwork, and began experimenting with drugs and alcohol. What started out with light consumption of marijuana soon turned into the consumption of heavy doses of LSD. On a drunken night at a party with friends, Richard was heavily intoxicated and admitted to a friend that his inability to perform sexually deeply affected him. So he soon turned to petty theft in order to afford his drug use and alcohol habit, and started getting into trouble with the police. In 1965, he was arrested for possession of marijuana and sentenced to community work. A year later, he broke into a neighbour's house and was caught trying to steal a bottle of alcohol. By the time Richard was due to graduate, his grades had slipped drastically. He was openly defiant with his teachers, and he had developed into a compulsive liar. What little friends he did have no longer wanted anything to do with him, and he graduated school in 1968 with D's and F's. Richard was now 18 and very unhappy. His drug use was out of control. He was falling further into depression due to his inability to maintain an erection. So he decided to see a therapist. Richard divulged his issues, along with the issues regarding his mental health and his family home life. The therapist felt that Richard's issues all stemmed from repressed anger and perhaps some underlying mental health issues. But this went no further. Richard received no help for his erectile dysfunction or his mental health. Despite all of his issues, Richard, along with some encouragement from his family, decided to enroll in college. The subjects he studied aren't specified, but it appears that his attitude towards learning hadn't changed. His grades were below average. He had absolutely no interest in studying. He had very few friends and seemed to be isolating himself even more. His appearance deteriorated. His hair grew long and greasy. His clothes were dirty and smelly. And it seemed that everyone around him could see this decline apart from his mother. Beatrice gave excuse after excuse when it came to her son. Even when it came to being caught stealing or with drugs, or, breaking into the neighbour's house, not her son, not her Richard. At the age of 20, Richard moved out of the family home, and I would say moved in with friends, but it was more of a roommate situation because Richard didn't have friends. He had people he knew and people that knew him, but no friends. His roommates described Richard as a slob. He never bathed, never washed or changed his clothes, never tidied, and tended to walk around naked. His behaviour was getting odder and odder, and he started suffering from paranoia and carrying a gun. His roommates said that they see him regularly waving the gun randomly out of his bedroom window at strangers below, and that he felt someone was spying on him. So he boarded up his bedroom door and hid in his closet for hours on end, nailing it shut from the inside.
Blimey.
His drug use had escalated from marijuana and LSD to absolutely anything that he could get his hands on. He smoked weed daily and wasn't shy about it either. So all of these behaviours led his roommates to ask him to leave. However, Richard refused, and his roommates were so concerned about his behaviours that they decided not to engage in an argument with him, but instead to leave themselves and find somewhere else for them to live. Because they were scared of Richard. He was unpredictable and aggressive and violent. Richard was now 21, struggling to hold down any jobs for longer than a day, struggling to find any roommates that would put up with his odd behaviour, struggling with his mental health, his paranoia, and a newly developed health anxiety. Richard decided to take a road trip to Utah to find himself. On this road trip, he was arrested for a DUI and held in the county jail until his dad could come and bail him out. So he was now forced to live back with his parents, where he complained endlessly of impossible illnesses and ailments. So his health anxiety was insane. It was hypochondria to the most extreme level.
Yeah, I was going to say in what respect, but yeah. So he convinced himself that he had something wrong with him and he was ill.
Absolutely. You'll see as we go along. So he told his parents that he had been gassed in the Utah County Jail and that his stomach was upside down, that his heart frequently stopped beating, and that he believed he was a walking corpse.
Oh.
And to be fair, that is what he looked like. Richard was stick thin. His cheeks were hollow, his eyes were sunken in, his skin was pale. His sister described him as being about as skinny as a man could get. After a very tumultuous relationship, Richard's parents decided to divorce permanently, so Richard ended up living with his father for a period of time. However, after just constant, endless issues, they decided that they just couldn't live together, so he moved in with his mother and sister. But again, his behaviour, his temper, his drug use was all out of control, and he ended up moving in with his grandmother in Los Angeles in May 1973. But yet again, his behaviour caused so many issues. He refused to bathe, refused to even wash his hands, complained constantly of heart issues, stomach issues, continued his drug use, and ended up living back with his mother after just a few months. His health anxiety just got worse and worse, to the point that he told his mum he was having a heart attack one day and to call the fire department. When paramedics arrived, they saw that he was indeed not having a heart attack, and they refused to treat him and instead suggested to Beatrice to take him to the hospital. So on 1st of December 1973, Beatrice took Richard to the hospital, and it was here that it became painfully clear that Richard was suffering with severe mental health issues, because he told the doctor that his heart had stopped beating, that his kidneys no longer worked, that his blood had turned to dust, his whole body was numb, and that someone had stolen his pulmonary artery. It doesn't take a anatomy expert to understand that if your heart has stopped beating, you will die, and if your pulmonary artery is
has
missing,
been pulled out,
you will die.
Yeah.
So obviously the doctor concluded that none of that had happened, and Richard was sent to see a psychiatrist. Richard defended his sanity. He told the psychiatrist that he didn't suffer from any delusions or hallucinations. He was well in his right mind and knew more about the goings-on of the human body than any doctor, because Richard had indeed been reading any book that he could get his hands on regarding human anatomy.
Oh.
And despite Richard's pleas of sanity, the psychiatrist believed that Richard was suffering from paranoid schizophrenia. However, he wasn't formally diagnosed with this, as the psychiatrist couldn't rule out the possibility that his paranoid schizophrenia wasn't substance-induced and the result of the multitude of drugs he was taking. Right. So he wasn't clinically diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. Richard was ultimately sent for a 72-hour observation at a psychiatric ward. However, this wasn't mandatory. He was free to leave of his own accord, which he did.
Yeah.
He went back to live with his mother, who throughout 1974 constantly ran him backwards and forwards to the hospital to have numerous scans and tests at Richard's request, all of which came back perfectly clear. Throughout 1975, Richard's paranoia spiraled out of control. He accused his mother of trying to poison him. He threw meals on the floor. He wouldn't drink from any open drinks. He started reading more books about health and decided the best way for him to absorb these extra nutrients that he needed, especially vitamin C, would be from oranges directly. So he often walked about with orange halves on his head because he believed that that was the best way for him to absorb vitamin C. He also believed that the bones in his cranium had begun to shift and that he could feel them moving around. Oh. So he decided to shave off all of his hair so that he could better feel and track the movements of these bones to make sure they weren't straying too far. He was aggressive and violent to his mother, accusing her of controlling his mind. He would often speak to people that weren't around, and he would often speak about UFOs and aliens.
I get it.
When his behaviour became completely out of control, Richard's father decided that it was high time that he move out from his mother and live by himself, away from other people. So he decided to get a little apartment for Richard and then to just pay the rent himself. But this didn't keep him out of the family's hair for very long. While alone in his apartment, Richard could come and go as he pleased. He had no one controlling him, no one telling him what to do. And Richard had been cycling to the nearby rabbit farm, buying them and bringing them home so that he could kill them, disembowel them, blend their organs up in his blender, mix it with Coca-Cola and drink it.
Oh, God.
And if that wasn't enough, he soon started injecting himself with their blood.
Oh, goodness.
Because Richard believed that his blood had turned to dust. So he needed to ingest blood into his system in order for him to survive. And by doing that, he would syringe out the blood of rabbits and syringe them directly into his veins. Again, it doesn't take a scientist to understand that that is not good for the body.
No.
So one afternoon, Richard Sr. found his son sat in his own apartment, pale and sick. He was sick, saying that he needed to go to the hospital as he had eaten a bad rabbit. So Richard Sr. took him to the hospital, and Richard told the doctor that he had eaten a rabbit that had eaten a battery, and now the battery acid was seeping out of that rabbit that he had ingested and into his stomach and his flesh, and that was why he was poorly. The truth was that Richard had septicemia. He had given himself blood poisoning from injecting this foreign blood into his own.
Oh.
So once he was treated and he was better, he was transferred to a psychiatric ward, and a conservatorship was being put in place by his parents.
What's that?
So that is, a conservatorship is the same thing that Britney Spears had. It is a legal document that means that a person is in charge of your decisions because you are not capable of making decisions.
Oh.
So Richard's parents were his conservatorship. They were able to make decisions on his behalf because he wasn't mentally fit to do so.
Got ya.
So Richard stayed in this ward where he was for about 2 days before he ran away.
Oh.
But this was a mandatory placement, so they found him and brought him back, and he was then placed in a Beverly Manor. And Beverly Manor is a facility that specialised in treating mentally ill patients. So again, this was non-negotiable. He had to, almost as if he'd been sanctioned, what we would say in the UK is that he'd been sectioned.
Right, okay.
He's there, he has to remain there for a certain amount of time. So this was around early 1976. And from what I can gather, he stayed there until about September 1976. During his time at Beverly Manor, he was treated with antipsychotic medication, which failed to work. It didn't cure his psychosis. He was still very mentally ill. But he was also made to participate in therapy sessions. During these therapy sessions, Richard disclosed his love of killing animals, his need to ingest their blood, otherwise his heart would shrink, because of the Nazi UFO conspiracy. He believed he was Jewish, despite him not being Jewish, and believed that he had been born with a Star of David on his head, and that was the reason that he was being targeted by the Nazis and why they had stolen his pulmonary artery.
Right.
So none of the staff or patients took anything that Richard said at face value because they knew he was psychotic. They didn't believe that the Nazi UFOs had turned his blood to dust or that he killed animals and drank their blood. They just didn't believe anything that he said. Until it happened right before their very eyes. The nurses went to Richard's room one evening to just check in and found him smothered in blood. His face, his head, his hands, blood stained his teeth as he grinned at the nurses.
Right.
On the window ledge next to his bed lay 2 birds. Their heads snapped, their intestines ripped out. And this wouldn't be the the last time that Richard was found smeared in blood, he seemed to make a habit of catching birds from his bedroom window. How he did this, nobody knows. And he would frequently drink their blood.
Oh.
But birds weren't his only prey. Richard was found stealing syringes from the nurses' stations and using them to extract blood from the therapy dogs before drinking it.
God.
During his time at Beverly Manor, Richard was given the nickname Dracula. All he ever spoke about was drinking blood and killing animals. He scared everyone there, and 2 nurses even quit their job because of him. And it is unsure why, again, it's unclear, but in September 1976, Richard's parents, who had been granted the conservatorship, decided to take him out of the facility. The discharge summary stated that he had developed good socialization skills, a realistic view of his problems, and that his thinking was clearer than when he entered.
What is wrong with these people that are doing these checks?
In no way, shape, or form was that the slightest bit true. I just believe that they wanted to get rid of him because he wasn't okay. But he was now on his antipsychotic medication, which didn't really work, and back in the care of his own family.
Brilliant.
His mother found him an apartment. So he went to live with his mother for a little time because of his behaviour, she then was like, no, see you later. She found him an apartment. And then this apartment was paid for by the social security checks that Richard was getting, like the disability that he was allowed. And she would then do his shopping, pay for his utility bills, things like that. And it is also unclear why, but at this time, Richard's mother decided that he no longer needed to be on his antipsychotic medication. She believed that it made him into a zombie. She didn't like how he was on them. So he had served his time in the mental health facility. He was now better. The discharge form said so. So she slowly weaned Richard off of his medication. And he continued his delusional health anxiety, believing that he needed to drink blood in order to stop his heart from shrinking. His brutal acts towards the neighbourhood animals continued at an alarming rate. He would steal the neighbours' dogs, cats, birds, mutilate them, drink their blood and their organs.
I'd burn his house to the ground.
He even bought 2 puppies from his neighbour just so that he could drink their blood. When a neighbour tried to search for their pet or report him, Richard took it upon himself to tell that neighbour exactly what he had done to their pet. Why nobody did anything, I don't know. Could you imagine Richard saying to you, oh, this is what I did to your dog, and you just calmly leaving the house?
No, I would rip his head clean off his shoulders and drop kick it out the door.
I'm
fucking fuming about it.
He turned up at his mother's house and stood on the front porch, knocked on the door. And when Beatrice opened the door to him, Richard was holding a dead cat. He proceeded to rip open the cat in front of her and shove his head in the open carcass, smearing the blood all over his face while screaming demonically. Beatrice,
his mum.
Yeah. He also killed the family dog as well. They had a German Shepherd that he killed, and then they was just like, oh, you know what, maybe it's best you don't live here, and they would just send him away because that's what you do.
Why are these people not seeing it? Or
Beatrice,
maybe they do see it and they're just like, I just can't.
Beatrice's response to this opening of the door, watching the
wearing the cat
on his face, Beatrice could only close the door to her son, calmly walk back inside. At no point did she think that perhaps he needed to go back on his medication, or that perhaps this incident needed reporting.
Are you serious?
So he was in his apartment alone, allowing his delusions and his health anxiety to run rampant. He now believed the Nazi UFO crime syndicate was trying to poison him by placing poison under his soap dish, which, if ingested, would turn his blood to powder. He stopped bathing again, stopped eating, stopped taking care of himself. His hair was long, his beard was long, his weight was unhealthily low. He weighed about 145 pounds and he was over 6 feet tall. So that's about 10 stone. He became obsessed with firearms and went out, bought and registered a 22 caliber semi-automatic handgun, despite his history of mental health issues. And he also became obsessed with finding out information about the newly named Hillside Strangler, who had been operating around that time, which was 2 men that had been raping, torturing, and killing female victims. In mid-1977, the conservatorship his parents had put in place came to an end after a year, and they made no attempt to renew it. So Richard was completely free to do as he wished. On August the 3rd, 1977, police found an abandoned Ford Ranchero that was stuck in a sandbank near Pyramid Lake Reservation in Nevada. So they searched the car for evidence of its owner and found inside a rifle loaded with 4 rounds and a 22 caliber semi-automatic handgun with 2 rounds in its clip. Both rifles were smeared with blood. On the driver's seat was a pile of men's clothing, all stained with blood, and atop the clothing sat a pair of bloody tennis shoes. As if this wasn't alarming enough, in the back, officers found a white plastic bucket. The white barely visible underneath the dark red blood that covered the entirety of the bucket. Inside the bucket, a raw, perfectly shaped liver sitting in a pool of fresh blood. So police began to search the surrounding area immediately, believing that this was some sort of homicide. And they found, less than a mile away, a naked man atop a rock, blood smeared over his face and body, and he was just screaming like a banshee. When the police went after him, he tried to run, but the police caught him. And once he was apprehended, he gave his name, Richard Trenton Chase, aged 27. When asked where all the blood had come from, Richard told the officer that it was his blood and that it was just seeping out of his body. In actuality, once the blood and the liver had been tested, it came back as having belonged to a cow. Oh. And because it had come back as belonging to a cow, all charges were dropped and Richard was given his guns back and released.
For the love of Jesus.
4 months later, on December 29th, 1977, Richard killed his first victim. Ambrose Griffin was a 51-year-old engineer and father of 2. He was stood outside his home, helping his wife unload the shopping from the car, when Richard drove past and fired 2 shots out of the car window. 1 shot flew past Ambrose. The second hit him in the chest, killing him instantly. Ambrose's wife heard the pop, but saw nothing else than the dropping of her husband to the floor. A senseless drive-by killing, a victim chosen by sheer opportunity. But this kill seemed to please Richard. He went out at the beginning of January and bought a copy of the newspaper that contained an article about the murder of Ambrose Griffin. The police had no suspects, only the shell casing of a 22 caliber bullet. The news of this random crime brought about a few witnesses. A young boy said that on that day, a man had driven past with dark hair and had shot at him, which fortunately missed. Similarly, a woman in the same neighbourhood reported hearing a gunshot near her home 2 days prior to Ambrose's death. And when police came to check her house, they did indeed find a 22 caliber bullet lodged in one of her kitchen cupboards. But however, these witnesses brought about no suspects. On the 11th of January 1978, just a few weeks later, a neighbour of Richard's, Dawn Larson, had a run-in with him. She knew of Richard. She had seen him carrying at least 3 separate animals into his apartment and had never seen or heard from them again. She kept to herself because Richard was odd and frightening, and she was right to do so. Richard accosted her that day and asked for a cigarette. She handed him one and went to continue walking away. However, he grabbed her and stopped her and wouldn't let her leave until she gave him the entire pack. Nearly 2 weeks later, on the 23rd of January, Richard was prowling the streets before stopping at 2909 Bernice Street, the home of Jean Layton. She saw Richard stop in front of her house, saw him walk up her driveway and try to open the porch door. Thankfully, she kept it locked. So Richard went to the side of the house and tried the windows. Again, locked. So she walked to the back of the house, where she came face to face with Richard Chase. The glass in the window of the back door was the only thing separating them. He tried the handle of the back door, but Jean stood her ground, knowing that it was locked. Richard never looked away. He kept eye contact the whole time. Finding the door locked, he got out a cigarette, showing no emotion whatsoever, lit it, and turned calmly around to walk away. Just down the street, however, Richard did find a house that was unlocked. Robert and Barbara Edwards had just returned home from a shopping trip and were bringing their groceries inside when Robert heard a noise, a window slamming at the back of the house. It seemed that the returning of the owners had spooked Richard enough to make a quick exit out the back of the house. However, on doing so, he actually came into contact with Robert, who saw Richard's shabby, unkempt appearance and judged him as being the man that had been in his home. So he began to chase him, but lost sight of him as Richard jumped over a fence. Police were called, and they found the home in complete shambles. Richard had clearly been looking for something to steal, but while doing so, had urinated into a pile of freshly laundered baby clothing and also defecated on the infant's bed.
Oh, for God's sake.
That same day, so he had tried Jean's door and also Robert and Barbara's house as well. So while Richard continued his escape from that house, he bumped into a woman called Nancy that he used to go to high school with. But she didn't recognise him at all, and she was kind of a bit wary because he was dirty, smelly, agitated, and she described him as looking as though he needed a fix. But what struck her odd was his choice of clothing. He was wearing a bright orange ski parka jacket. And Richard very quickly reminded her of who he was, and they spoke for a few minutes, but Nancy just wanted to get away. So she tried to walk towards her car, which was parked in the car park just a little bit away, and he followed her, asking her for a ride, but she literally jumped into her car, locked the doors, and then sped away, not even caring that she was being rude. She followed Nancy. Her instinct and was like, no, thank you.
No, thank you. Not today, bitch.
So Richard was now left without the ride that he wanted. So he continued on foot. He wound his way through the nearby houses, trying doors at random, until he found 2630 Tioga Way, the home of Teresa and David Wallin. Teresa was a 22-year-old woman with some exciting news. She was soon to share with her family. She was 3 months pregnant. So excited were the couple that they had already picked out the baby's name, Dane. Teresa had just unlocked the front door with a handful of garbage to take out when Richard had tried her door and found it unlocked. To both of their surprise, they came face to face and stared at each other for a short moment. Before Richard raised his .22 caliber gun, he fired one shot that went through Teresa's hand as she raised it to try and protect herself. The bullet travelled up her forearm and exited her elbow, grazing her neck on the way out. Jeez. The second bullet entered her skull, and she dropped to the floor. Richard stood atop Teresa and fired one more bullet into her temple for good measure. He left her there on the floor while he went to the kitchen to get a knife from the kitchen block. He came back to where Teresa lay. picked up a used yogurt pot that had spilled from the garbage bag, and then dragged Teresa's body into the bedroom and laid her on the bed. He raped her body while stabbing her repeatedly in the chest and torso. He sliced off her left nipple and cut her torso open from just below the sternum. He removed her intestines and stabbed in a frenzy at her vital organs, letting the blood ooze out and pour into the empty cavity that her intestines had occupied. He used the empty yogurt container to scoop out her blood, take it to the bathroom where he bathed his head and face in it before drinking it. He severed both of her kidneys and placed them neatly side by side inside her body and cut her spleen in two. Once satisfied, he left, but not before going into the garden, finding some dog feces and stuffing it into Teresa's mouth and throat. When Teresa's husband David came home from work at 6 p.m. that evening, he opened the front door and found the spilled garbage bag over the floor and a large stain that looked like oil. Their German Shepherd dog just sitting and waiting for him. He followed the stains through the house and into the bedroom, where he found Teresa's mangled body, her jumper pulled up above her breasts, her underwear around her ankles, her legs splayed open, her body eviscerated. Police found tons of evidence at the home: the blood-stained yogurt pot, bloody handprints, bloody footprints, the bullet casings, bloody marks on the floor. They were like in a ring that suggested the use of a bucket. But police weren't able to match any of this to a single person. They were, however, able to match the bullets up to that of the bullet that had killed Ambrose Griffin. So police only knew that they were now looking for a serial killer, and it was likely that they would kill again. And that's exactly what happened. January 27th, just 4 days after Teresa's murder, Richard was out on the prowl again, and this time he entered the home of 38-year-old Evelyn Maroth. Evelyn had volunteered to babysit her 22-month-old nephew, David. The little boy helped to keep her 6-year-old son, Jason, occupied. She had also enlisted the help of her neighbour, Dan Meredith, to just quickly watch the two boys while she went and had a bath. She had left the door unlocked after Dan came in and then went for her bath. It was then that Richard happened upon the unlocked door. Dan heard someone come in and close the front door, so he went out into the entrance hall to check and was greeted with Richard's .22 caliber gun. Richard shot him in the head at point-blank range. Hearing the gunshot, 6-year-old Jason ran out of the front room and towards his mother's bedroom. Richard went after him. Seeing the little 22-month-old David now alone in the front room in his cot, he shot him in the head, killing him instantly. He then caught up with Jason and shot him twice at point-blank range in the head. He then found Evelyn in the bathroom and shot her in the head before dragging her body out of the bathroom and into her bedroom, lying her on her bed just a few feet away from little Jason's body. He slashed at the back of her neck multiple times and let the blood ooze out, drinking from it thirstily while anally raping her multiple times. Once he was finished, he stabbed her multiple times in the anus and tried to remove her eyeball. He replicated what he had done to Teresa by stabbing her vital organs multiple times and letting the blood gather in her abdomen before cutting it open and draining the contents into something that he'd fashioned into a bucket and drinking from it, smearing it all over himself and the bathroom walls. He then went and retrieved the little body of 22-month-old David. He took him into the bathtub and split open his skull to remove his brain matter before eating it. At this moment, there was a knock at the front door. A little girl had come to make sure Joseph was okay because he was due for a play date at our house and hadn't turned up. This knock at the door startled Richard. He took David's body and went into the hallway where he took Dan's keys and wallet from his body, and using Dan's red station wagon, he fled the scene.
Oh, thank God.
When Richard got back to his apartment, he took little David's body with him and mutilated it even further. He sliced open his abdomen and took out several organs which he blended up to drink as smoothies. He also chopped off his penis and used it as a straw to suck the blood from his empty body. When he was finally through with little David, Richard took him to the nearby church and disposed of his body in a cardboard box. Meanwhile, the little girl that had knocked at Evelyn's home for Joseph had spotted Richard fleeing the scene and went to fetch the neighbour, who then took one look inside the home and called the police. When the police arrived, they found a scene similar to that of Teresa Wallin's home, a blood-stained massacre. No care had been taken to conceal the crime. Perfect bloody handprints led throughout the house, perfectly imprinted bloody shoe prints everywhere, the same shoe prints that were found at Teresa's home. The bullet casings littered around, making it easy for police to match it to the same gun that had been used in the other crimes. While police were searching the home, the mother of 22-month-old David stopped by to pick up her son. Until then, police didn't know that there had been another victim. They'd only counted the bodies that had been left in the home. But it was clear from the bullet hole and blood stain in his crib that David wouldn't be found alive. Police found Dan Meredith's red station wagon abandoned a few miles away. Keys still in the ignition, engine on, blood everywhere. But police had no idea that their killer lived in an apartment just 100 yards away from the abandoned vehicle. They compiled a profile of the killer so that they could put it out and appeal for witnesses. And it's the most accurate profile I've ever come across.
Really?
They said they were looking for a disorganized killer. These crimes were not planned, and there was no attempt at hiding any evidence. They gathered that as the crime scenes were located nearby, he didn't have a car, which meant that most likely he lived quite near to the crime scene. It was highly likely that he would kill again and not stop until he was caught. They figured he was a white male in his mid-20s, thin and undernourished. Evidence of the crimes would be found at his home. He would either have a history of mental illness, such as psychosis or drug abuse, or both, and would be somewhat of a loner. He lived alone, or if he lived with someone else, it would be his parents. He would be a high school or college dropout, be unemployed, claiming disability, and would likely be suffering from paranoia.
Wow.
They also gathered up a ton of witness statements and drew up a sketch of the killer and released it to the public. They were looking for a killer with long dark hair, in his mid-20s, dirty looking, wearing a bright orange parka. This appeal caught the attention of Nancy Holden. She recalled a few days prior an odd encounter that she had had with an old classmate, Richard Chase, and remembered distinctly that he had been wearing a bright orange parka. So she phoned the police and said she believed the killer to be Richard Trenton Chase. Police did a quick background search of Richard and found his history of mental health issues, his detainment in the mental health facility, his arrest in Nevada, and also minor drug-related offences. So they decided to pay him a visit. They knocked on his door, knowing that he was home, but refusing to answer. So they waited and waited, and Richard still refused to answer the door. So they decided to leave, but not leave completely. They spoke loudly to each other about the fact that they were about to leave so that Richard could hear them. And then they hid out of
thing where they said,
"We're off now.
Okay, we're going to go now." And then they were like,
"Yeah, he's clearly not our suspect. Let's go."
Yeah.
Yeah, that is literally what they did. And then they hid out of sight and waited for Richard to come out.
Brilliant.
Which he absolutely did.
Yeah.
Not long after, Richard came waltzing out, carrying a cardboard box full of items, and the police pounced. But not without a mighty struggle from Richard. He certainly wasn't about to go quietly. He tried to run from the police, and he had his .22 caliber gun on him at the time.
Oh.
The detective in charge, Detective Wayne Irie, saw Richard's gun in his pocket, and for a moment, he contemplated just shooting Richard. It would have been a justified killing. And he thought to himself, they didn't know where baby David was.
Right.
And also the detective, he didn't want to be a killer like Richard, so he decided not. So the police just caught up with him and apprehended him. So Richard had come strolling out of his front door, wearing a bright orange parka covered in bloodstains, shoes that were also noticeably covered in blood, and his 22 caliber semi-automatic handgun, also covered in blood.
Great.
When they searched him further, they found Dan Meredith's wallet in his back pocket and a pair of latex gloves. And the box that he had been carrying contained loads of blood-stained wallpaper and blood-stained rags. When he was taken to the police station and questioned, Richard was extremely uncooperative, saying that he had only ever killed a few dogs, nothing else. He said that he thought the killer was a blonde man in an orange jacket and that the Italians were trying to frame him and that someone had been coming in and out of his apartment. While he was being questioned, police began the search of his apartment, hoping to find little baby David. What they found in that putrid-smelling apartment was hell. Nearly every single thing in that apartment was covered in blood. The walls, the furniture, the cutlery, the glasses, food, the fridge, like everything in that house was covered in blood. In the kitchen, the countertops were covered in blood. A blender sat atop the counter, covered in coagulated blood and rotting internal organs. Small fragments of bone were found and a handful of dog collars.
Oh, fucking hell.
Inside the fridge were several animal parts wrapped in foil, a Tupperware box containing part of a brain, and a small body part contained in saran wrap. What the police didn't know at that time was that this was the remains of little David's brain and part of his body. On the kitchen table lay different science books open on pages of human anatomy, along with newspapers containing circled ads for dogs that were being sold.
Ugh.
Along with all the disturbing evidence of his prior crimes lay a calendar containing information on his future crimes. Richard had circled dates on his calendar and wrote the word today. 2 dates in the past linked to the dates that he had murdered Teresa and Evelyn, and police found a further 44 more dates all circled with the word today.
Bloody hell.
As for finding David's body, it would take until March that year for them to find the rest of David's body, where Richard had dumped it a few months earlier. In early 1979, Richard Chase stood trial on 6 counts of murder, with Richard saying, "I didn't kill anybody, just a few people."
What?
Due to his perceived Jewish heritage, Richard demanded a lawyer from the Jewish Defense League, but was denied this plea. While in custody, Richard believed his food was being poisoned and had it sent for testing, which obviously came back fine. The prosecution were adamant on getting the death penalty. They wanted nothing less for Richard. However, his own attorney wanted to go down the route of not guilty by reason of insanity. His reasons for committing the crimes were purely self-preservation. He believed the poisoning he was suffering meant that he didn't have enough blood in his body to survive. Animal blood wasn't making it any better, so he needed human blood. If he didn't ingest human blood, then he was going to die. So he also told the court that he hadn't chosen his victims for any reason other than that their door was unlocked. He took an unlocked door to mean that he was welcome into their home, whereas a locked door meant that he was unwelcome. So Richard pled not guilty by reason of temporary insanity and then demanded to see a heart specialist about his missing pulmonary artery.
For God's sake.
Richard's mother was there with him every step of the way, just completely failing to see the severity of his crimes or of his mental illness. Seeing Teresa's husband in the court one day, listening to his victim impact statement, she decided to confront him and speak to him. What do you think Richard's mother said to the husband of the woman that he murdered, of the father who never got to meet his son? She criticised their German shepherd for not being more aggressive and for not protecting Teresa.
Oh, fuck off. Fucking hell.
So David was so stunned by what she had said that he could only respond by saying, "Why didn't you protect us from your son?"
Yeah.
On May 8th, 1979, The jury deliberated on the case and came back with a verdict of guilty on 6 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced Richard Chase to death by gas chamber. While on death row, his fellow inmates that had also been convicted of horrendous crimes were actually scared of Richard. He was unpredictable, violent, psychotic, and they actively encouraged him to kill himself, despite the fact that he was on death row.
Yeah. No, I get that. I completely get that.
But after his conviction, Richard was interviewed by psychiatrists regarding an appeal, which every inmate on death row is entitled to. And this was documented. So I'm just going to read this document. The document says, Chase advised that he is considering an appeal because of the fact that under Californian law, it is justifiable homicide when a person kills to save his own life, and that in the case of his murders, Chase was killing to obtain blood which was necessary to sustain life, thus justifiable homicide. Chase further said that he was ordered to commit the murders by the death rays which were directed at him from the UFOs. In retrospect, Chase stated that he probably should not have committed the killings because the deteriorating condition of his stomach and blood supply might have been cured if he prayed harder to the UFOs. He also offered a justification for the murders, the fact that there had been many aircraft accidents in the past years which were caused by the UFOs. He clutched an envelope in his hand during the interview, which was addressed to the President of the United States. He advised that he would like to be transferred to a hospital on the East Coast so that he could be closer to the government and further from the UFOs. He stated that he is now being poisoned by the prison authorities and that he has been poisoned since his first year on Earth by his mother and various mafia figures. Chase displayed numerous writings that he had prepared to explain his case, all of which heavily centered on involvements of UFOs, CIA, mafia, airline disasters, and unexplained murders, which he felt impacted his life. The writings were very typical of a paranoid psychotic personality. On December the 26th, 1980, the day after Christmas, 30-year-old Richard Chase was found dead in his cell, having taken an overdose of antidepressants and antipsychotic medication that he had been stowing away. As psychotic as he was, Richard still had enough mental capacity to know exactly what he needed to do to end his life. So, was Richard criminally insane?
Mm-hmm.
I was going to end this episode by reading the letter that Richard had written to the president, but it's quite lengthy. So what I'm going to do is read it at the very end. I'll read it, but we'll put it at the end of the podcast. So if you do want to listen to it, just hang on past the credits at the end, and I will read that excerpt from the from what Richard had written, because it does give you an insight into his psyche and the way that he was thinking. So if you want to listen to that, just hang around. But what I wanted to ask was if you felt that Richard was criminally insane or if he should have been sentenced to death.
I think he was deeply, deeply disturbed. It kind of almost surprises me that he said the reason that he did all of this was to save his own life. And that's what he said in court. That was his defense.
Yeah.
I only killed because, you know, I had to stay alive. So that was one thing. But then when he was put on death row, he killed himself.
Yeah.
So it's like, well, how important is it?
Was it to stay alive?
Yeah. You went to all that trouble and you killed all those people in horrendous ways, torture, rape. He didn't need to do that. If he's saying that he needed to kill them and, ingest their blood and their organs and brain and, and all that. You didn't need to rape them, did you? You didn't need to stab her in the anus and like that. So that side of it, I'm like, I don't believe that he was doing it to stay alive. I don't think he ever actually properly believed that. I think he was evil. I'm not saying that he wasn't mad, because he absolutely, I think he definitely was very mentally ill. But I think ultimately he was a serial killer and he was evil at the core, and he played out what he wanted to do.
Yeah, because that's it, isn't it? Mentally ill people aren't murderers.
No, no.
Paranoid
And not all
schizophrenics aren't
murderers are
murderers.
mentally ill. But I
No.
think in this circumstance, he was both.
Yeah.
I think he was an evil serial killer. And, coincidentally enough, he was also mentally ill, very mentally ill.
I think Richard's inability to perform sexually um affected him massively, because I think he then realized the reason he couldn't perform sexually was because he was aroused. He was a necrophiliac. He was
Mm.
aroused by the violence and killing of people.
Yeah.
And that's why he chose to do what he was doing.
Mm.
Um I do, again, like you said, I do believe he was incredibly mentally ill, and I think that could have been just
100%.
addressed
That could have been stopped
many
way
times.
before. Yeah, way
Why
before.
why he was allowed to buy that weapon is beyond me.
I know.
Why he was found with all of this blood, screaming with the cow's liver and stuff, and then just handed back his weapons. It was deemed that he wasn't a danger to society.
Yeah, well, that
Why
is
they
absolutely bonkers to me.
Yeah.
Absolutely bonkers. At what
But
point do people look at it on an individual case and go, do you know what? This person should not have a gun, and also we need to do something where this person can be kept an eye on. Like how many people have to die and be tortured and die before people are going to start saying, actually, yes, there's only maybe one or two tick boxes of like red flags with
mhm,
this person. However, we're going to keep an eye on them. And I
yeah.
appreciate there's probably billions of people that bring up red flags. I could be one of them. However, there was a lot of red flags with this. There was a lot of animals that died,
Yeah.
and there was a lot of
Yeah.
people that knew about all
That's
these
exactly it.
animals and things. And it's like, do you know what? We're nothing to do with law enforcement. We're nothing to do with like forensic teams, medical teams, nothing like that. We're not detectives. We are, however, professional. Um, but even for us that have researched, listened to, watched a lot of films about documentaries about true crime,
Mhm.
we know that there's basic red flags.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of red flags. There was a lot of
This is
animals that died.
So this is why I put in the beginning about the McDonald triad, because we know that killing animals,
Yeah.
setting fires and bedwetting, those three,
Yeah.
they don't make a serial killer, but they are a basis
Yeah.
there which
Yeah,
could
they're red
predetermine
flags.
they are
Yeah.
red flags. However, that term was coined a few years after, or all of like before, after
Yeah.
Richard was a child. So
Right.
had that been around, they could have gone, gosh, these are all red flags. They didn't know they were red flags. They didn't know they were precursors to potentially what could have come. So I
Yeah.
think, again, it was a sign of the times. Richard's mother was more of a, oh, I don't want anyone to know that my son is mentally ill, so I'm just going to sweep it under the rug.
Mm.
It's embarrassing for me to know that my son is like this, so I'm just going to put him up in an apartment away from everybody so that he can't be seen.
Yeah.
So I think it was a sign of the times as well.
No, I get that. And I think, it's all very well for us to sit here and, be blamey, blamey after the fact. the fact of the matter is, none of the law enforcement, friends or family, I'm not talking for his parents because I don't know, but I'm sure none of them wanted those people to die.
Mm-hmm.
So, like I said, it's all very well for us to sit here going, well, they should have seen it, they should have done it, they should have
Yeah.
stopped it. I think if people genuinely thought that he was going to go out and do those horrendous things to people, I'm sure they would have stepped in. I'm sure something would have been done, or but it's just, yeah, it's just frustrating because it's just those people. It's tragic, is what it is. That should never have happened to those people. It should never have happened to to that family and their little boy and his wife and mother. It's just fucking awful. Really,
Yes.
really hideous.
Yep. But yeah, so that's the story as it is. And I just, like I said, this falls into the category of what the fuck.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do want to read this letter. But again, I'll put that at the end. So
Yeah, no, I think that's a good idea actually, because if people like, I don't want to hear it, then
yeah.
they can go.
Cool. All right, so we will end it there then.
Thank you very much for that, Poddy, and thank you very much for everyone's that's listened through to this part with us. And yeah, it was well told, but it was horrendous to think about.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Poddy.
You're welcome. And next week I will do a much nicer one.
Yes, Sarah is taking these next few episodes because she's done episode 138, this one, which is 139, and she's being an absolute champion because
Busy,
working
busy.
I'm working on something.
Yeah.
So Sarah is being an absolute champ and doing all these episodes,
Love
and
it.
I'm really impressed by it, to be honest, because they're not like, oh, I've just got to whip up another story. It's like they're really good stories. They're really interesting, perplexing stories.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're loving it.
Great.
Thank you very
All right.
much.
See you next week.
See you all next week.
Bye.
Bye.
If you have enjoyed listening to our episodes, make sure you rate us and leave us a review on whatever platform you are listening.
We absolutely love hearing from you guys. So you can also help support our show by donating to our Buy Me a Coffee link. We will make sure that you get a massive shout out and a big thank you in our next week's episode.
You can also follow us on social media at Perplexed Podcasts. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and if you want to see more videos and blooper reels, subscribe to our TikTok and YouTube channels.
You can also email us your stories at perplexedpodcasts@gmail.com.
And you can find all the relevant links in the episode descriptions. Thanks for listening. Bye.
Bye.
So if you have made it past the credits, then you are here to listen to the letter that Richard Chase wrote to the president about his appeal. And it is dated June 9th, 1979. And it reads, to the Congress of the United States, appeal for Federal Appeals Court on matters involving espionage. I have recently been sentenced to death in California with the option for appeal to state and federal authority to review my case. The major points of appeal ultimately deal with the existence of a UFO death ray used as a weapon and its relation to me. The facts and considerations involved in the trial were many, and matter was complicated in the involvement of police control because of their secret of the UFO and its power to run a minute-by-minute report on a complicated machine that could be controlled by threats to people involved in its entries, similar to computer control of humans. simply by motioning to kill or threat me as the defendant in this case. Some of this isn't written very well, so I'm just reading it as it's written, so some of it might not make sense. It would be possible to explain this in a table outline that would open another case of murder and conspiracy of enormous proportions. Number 1. I was born in 1950. I was Jewish. My birth was signified by a birthmark that was noted as a Star of David on my forehead. News spread, I believe, the first reports were made by my doctor. Several underground forces thought it could be a sign of UFO cloning experiments. Having concluded this, an underground in Sacramento, he was killed in an airplane wreck, shot down by this underground. There is a report on wreckage, but I've not been able to make the county investigator or public defender raise this as an issue in my defense. There is loads of suppressed evidence that an underground exists, and documentary evidence alone proves that I have political pressure from Sacramento that makes it impossible for me to get anything but a political development in the courtroom, including tremendous pressure from news media, live movies, televised from the courtroom from a Channel 13 Sacramento. Number 2. Development of the case itself begins in or about 1968. It was at about this time I began to take notice of physical impairment and saw a psychiatrist about it. I had no knowledge at this time that since the death of Dr. Scott in 1951, my mother had been prompted to poison me. Pressure from fascist activists was involved. Cannibalism was one of their goals, and there is evidence in Sacramento that could be found as bones of missing persons. I first began discovering the facts about Sacramento in about 1975. Further complicating matters was my discovery of UFO intelligence, observing my activities approximately 6 or 7 months before I killed 6 people in Sacramento. The recent rash of aeroplane accidents and disasters can be, if studied, concluded as related to my situation by several reasons. Number 1. A neighbour since 1962, the name has been redacted, 6 or 7 months before, gave me a picture of a flying saucer that I had been interested in since he had told me about them in 1962. Number 2. The recent crashes of thousands of small aeroplanes in the USA. Number 3. Occurring at the same time as important decisions, in my case, both decided against me because of political pressure and knowledge of the UFO involvement, though unadmitted, can be proved by investigations of officers reported to me to have made $1 million each in making threats in trying this case, including paying off all involved on the jury, and can be proved if investigated by FBI and a federal court. The defense I was given against the killing of the 6 persons in Sacramento was originated by a public defender that seemed to know my background and introduced himself as a friend of the family and had been chosen for me. I told him the story as I remembered it, beginning with the first hospitalization for heart attacks in 1972. This was brought on by head injuries I received in a fight with some Italians that had been close friends up until the time I found out that I was Jewish, about 21 years old. After that incident, I noted a weakened condition in my heart and head. I borrowed several books and studied the circulation in the textbooks. It was the first time that I learned the directional flow of blood through the body. The Italians were never made to come to court to testify that there had been a fight and to how many times I had been hit in the head. I insisted they knew and were involved in the conspiracy against me, yet he would not subpoena them. In 1975, I had received Social Security for disablement. I heard a lot about fascists that had killed people right in the area that I lived, Cannon Street in North Sacramento. They hid the bodies in the sewer. A lot, thousands, since I was a kid. I was sick, and propaganda on television gave me the idea that these local personalities had committed many of the crimes they talked on television, giving me the idea that killing was legal in Sacramento. These included a list that had been found in my apartment in a yellow notebook. This then was the same time that they may have been expecting me to get an idea to kill an animal because they knew I had been poisoned, was desperate, and was suffering shock. A year before, after seeing name redacted, May 1977, and discovering the UFOs on the drive back from Colorado, which landed on several occasions and did not lose contact even in Sacramento. They kept bright lights in the sky. I noticed them and believed that their intelligence was high so that they could not help me by landing and giving me first aid equipment. In May 1976, I killed a rabbit at the Cannon Street residence and drank the blood. Just as I suspected, I was being followed and watched by the underground, including the first definite signs in 1973 when an Italian sheriff moved in across the street. And then in 1974, a Folsom prison guard moved in next door. Suspicious mafia. Now I had proof positive because the rabbit had been poisoned and I was admitted to the community hospital in North Sacramento. I asked for a transfusion, but they would only treat me for poison, septic shock after a few days. A Dr. Blank arrived and demanded that I come with him to Ark Hospital. Something psychiatrist, he called for a judge and my parents and had a trial at the hospital, found me insane from paranoid schizophrenia, and I was not allowed to leave the hospital. I asked for another doctor after several months because the drugs were knocking me out. After several months later, Blank said he could help me get out of the hospital and on Social Security that had been authorised for me by Blank. Because of this, I was released, but had so much trouble outside the normal range of local people in the form of racism against me. I then left Sacramento by bus, which led to the discovery of UFOs, which matched Blank's picture he had given me only days before I left. There is evidence that I was well known and followed by the Sacramento society that had developed. And when they found out how to control the UFOs by threatening me, they set forth to construct a plan to capture me for crimes related to the ones that had committed, afraid that I or my people may discover how to use UFO power to arrest them and find the remains of bodies they had hidden over the past 20 years in sewers in the local community. This would be missing persons of similarity to myself. Facts brought out in the first court were so suppressed, I left the feeling that my story was imaginary, and the jury's decision did not include that my story was true if they would not give me a second-degree decision. All the public defender allowed for witness for the defence were psychiatrists who had found me insane and doctors who had found me physically disabled. Then the penalty death was judgment. There was no way I could accumulate documentary evidence or witnesses through their public defender's office. If I can have amnesty to the interior United States, I could prove that Form Sacto County and Palo Alto by threatening me. They used the UFO machine to shoot down thousands of aeroplanes as a threat to government. For instance, my dad is federally employed as a computer programmer, knows all the facts in the case, but has not been able to help me in any way because of the control. To the federal government, this could be valuable information. Under your control, I could take Sacramento to court for treason. Federal aviation may be interested in the causes of plane disasters, recent extensive news covered in the USA. They were giving me a chance for the prison here at San Quentin in Mill Valley to write letters and have visits with anyone that could help me build a case against the death penalty because of misconstruing information and suppressing documentary evidence and important testimony. Further, sheriffs at Palo Alto made millions each for the job officers, all of which can be investigated, and it would be suggested that they had hidden the money in case of this possibility because they do have a large underground that is aware of all the statements I have made, both pro and con on the issues of police bribes in large quantities against me and the UFO and its power to destroy by means of even earthquakes or blizzards, and especially airplanes seem to affect the case. In particularly noted first of a helicopter crash in Chicago and a 100 other that I had read about the world over. At this time, I had become sick again from a similar poisoning. I went to Dr. Blank's office for a medical reason. He was upset about something and did not want to help me any further. I knew it was UFOs, but did not know how that they were shooting down planes. They were Nazis, and they knew I would kill someone if there were reason that I could get no medical help, and thought I had power against them from a UFO ship. The sheriff's department in Sacramento is behind the control of the arrest before the killings actually occurred. There is evidence confiscated from my apartment which can be identified as conclusive of this. If it can be found and has not been defiled by the DA, this is reason to believe they have made millions also, and they must be investigated. They have found it possible to discourage people trying to help me with the UFO death ray. I'm sure I need to see federal government agents so that this racket fall into legal hands before I am systematically executed or held for life by bribes from them. The DAs referred more than one to a UFO death ray and even threatened one of my doctors if he did not restate his presumption that I was insane. Another of my doctors, who had stated that I was under the law not aware of right from wrong because of physical damage from what he apparently knew was true by inspection only. The same attitude was given to all the psychiatrists and physical diagnosis. There was a great doubt to my character because I had practiced cannibalism, as I knew they had done to women of my race in Sacramento. The officer who first controlled me at Sacto and made the first $1 million from the Nazi underground in Sacto were blank and Sergeant blank. I can go into more detail and explanation if you will please send the necessary officials and documents so that I may be moved to a federally controlled situation and prove that all facts and statements contained herein are true. A trial without the Sacramento following gathered at the trial, who are the cause of the problems involved, especially Sacto media. A federal court is suggested because of their coverage is abnormal, unnecessary, and phony from the stance of their being. A family dedicated and directly related by media to the happenstance and cover-up of the UFO interruption. The case is normally circulated in the papers, even sold in USSR and Canada. If possible, these people will give up to a pressure that is so large and tell the truth behind the story of indoctrination of me and its relationship to all circumstances involved. A list of suppressed material and documentary system is enclosed and is available to me through a federal court. Thank you, Richard Chase.